Hello all, welcome back to our English class. In the previous class, we learned a story, The Best Investment I Ever Made. You saw that how a helping hand transformed Mr. John into a selfless supporter of humanity. Today we are discussing a new poem, The Ballad of Father Gilligan by W.B. Yeats. William Butler Yeats is an Irish poet and one of the foremost figures of 20th century literature. In 1923, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his inspired poetry. Yeats is one of the few writers who completed his greatest work after being awarded the Nobel Prize, which include The Tower, The Winding Stair, and other poems. It's about a Father Gilligan who rendered selfless service to the poor and the needy in his parish. By the way, what's a ballad? Ballad is a poem or song narrating a story in short stanzas, just like a folk song. The Ballad of Father Gilligan is a narrative poem telling a story. The poem is musical and dramatical with 12 stanzas of 4 lines each. The old priest Peter Gilligan was very night and day, for half his flock were in their beds or under green swords lay. The old priest, Father Peter Gilligan, was the central character of the story. He was very night and day. Very means he was very tired. He was tired night and day. For means because half his flock were in their beds. Flock means the people in the parish. According to Christian tradition, Jesus Christ is considered as the shepherd and the people are called flocks. The old priest, Father Gilligan, was performing his priestly obligations day and night. He had to conduct funeral services to those who were dying large numbers due to epidemic. That was conveying through these 2 lines. For half his flock were in their beds or under green swords lay. Half of the parishioners were bedridden or under green swords lay. Under green swords lay means they died due to a contagious disease. They are under the soil. That's called under green swords lay. Why was Father Gilligan very night and day? Why? Because he was performing his priestly duties day and night. He had to conduct funeral services to those who were dying large numbers due to epidemic. What is the significance of the word flock? Flock means the parishioners of Father Gilligan. Why were his flock either in bed or lying under green sod? What is the meaning of sod? Sod means the surface of the ground with the grass growing on it or turf. Why were his flock either in bed or lying under green sod? Why? Because they were either affected with the fatal epidemic or they had already become the victims of the deadly diseases. Okay, then we can move on to the second stanza. Once while he nodded in a chair at the moth hour of the eve, and the poor man sent for him, and he began to grieve. One day, due to his tiredness, he is about to sleep on his chair. The presence of insects indicates it as evening, moth hour. At that time, someone calls for priest help. The priest feels upset about being called. His continuous help to the needy people and his tiredness makes him to get upset. Once while he nodded in a chair. Nod means to move one's head up and down to show agreement. Nodded. Once he was sleeping in his chair at the moth hour of the eve. Moth hour means that time when moths are coming in large numbers, the insects like butterflies are coming in large numbers in the evening. And the poor man sent for him. Father was called for the priestly obligations. He was called for and he became greatly distressed. Grieve means he became very sad. I have no rest, no joy, no peace. For people die, and after cried he, God forgive. My body spake, not I. In this stanza, the poet describes Father Gilligan saying that since people keep dying and since he is expected to be with them in their last hours, they are dying. He is not getting any rest, he has no reason to feel happy, and he is never peaceful either. However, in the next moment, he regretted railing against his vocation and apologized to God, saying that it was his very body that had spoken and not he himself. Soon Peter Gilligan began to complain that he had no rest nor peace since people continued to die in his area. Realizing his mistake, he asked God's forgiveness by saying that it was his tired body that spoke those words, and the words had not come out from his heart. Okay, this is showing his humbleness. Why did another man send for Father Gilligan? Why is the man referred to as poor? He was sent for the priest to receive the last communion, and thereby he can go to the heaven. Why did Father Gilligan seek forgiveness from God? What justification does he give to God for his errant words? It was his God given duty to look after the parishioners, so his desperate outburst was sin and challenge to God. Father Gilligan endures to rationalize his errant words by saying that it was his exhausted body, not his spirit, that complained of the state of his life. Why is the time called moth hour? It is early evening, and at this time moths are seen in large numbers. He knelt and leaning on the chair, he prayed and fell asleep. And the moth hour went from the fields, and stars began to peep. Father Gilligan knelt and prayed and soon fell asleep. The moths went away from the fields, and the stars began to look through a narrow opening. Kneel past tense is knelt. Kneel means rest on knees. Peep means look through a narrow opening. Stanza, Father Gilligan knelt on the ground, putting his folded hands on chair before him. While praying in that position, he suddenly fell asleep. The evening went by, and a few stars appeared in the sky at nightfall. They slowly into millions grew, and leaves shook in the wind, and God covered the world with shade and whispered to mankind. In this stanza, the poet describes that the whole sky was filled with stars and how the wind shook the leaves on the trees. It seemed as if God had decided to envelop the entire world in darkness, and that he was whispering words to mankind in the form of rustling of leaves. By hearing the rustling sound of leaves, we can predict that the God is whispering something to mankind. God had covered the world with darkness and whispered to mankind. Upon the time of sparrow chirp, when the moths came once more, the old priest Peter Gilligan stood upright on the floor. In this stanza, the poet describes what happened early the next morning. It was the next day morning when sparrows began to chirp and the moths came back again to the fields. Having woken up from sleep, Father Gilligan stood upright on the floor. Sparrows had begun to chirp. Chirp means making sounds. And the song of moths had come back once again. Suddenly, Father Gilligan woke up and stood bolt upright. Stood upright means stand in a vertical position. Mavron, the man has died. While I slept in the chair, he roused his horse out of its sleep and rode with little care. In this stanza, the poet says that Father Gilligan was shocked at the realization that the man who had called for him the previous night must have died while Father Gilligan was sleeping. He then woke his horse up and started riding recklessly. Without much care, he started his horse and began to ride. Mavron, Mavron, he yelled, he cried, thinking that the man had died. He roused his horse immediately and rode carelessly with the intention to reach the poor man's house the earliest. He rode now as he never rode, by rocky lane and fen. The sick man's wife opened the door. Father, you come again. In this stanza, the poet describes how Father Gilligan rode as fast as he could through narrow roads and marshy lands. When he finally reached the sick man's house, his wife opened the door and was surprised to see Father Gilligan wondering aloud why he had come again. Father Gilligan rode by rocky lane and marshy places, quickly reached the sick man's house. The sick man's wife opened the door and was astonished or surprised to see Father back again. And is the poor man dead? He cried. He died an hour ago. The old priest Peter Gilligan in grief sighed to and fro. In this stanza, Father Gilligan inquired about the sick man and came to know that he had died an hour ago. Repentance came to him and he sighed to and fro out of agony or worry, for he had able to his assigned duty. Father Gilligan asking the sick man's wife whether her husband had passed away, and the wife answering that he had in fact died just an hour ago. Father Gilligan was so distressed or so unhappy to hear this that he had not stand steady and began to serve, and he was walking to and fro because of distress. When you were gone, he turned and died, as merry as a bird. The old priest Peter Gilligan, he knelt him at that word. In this stanza, the poet says that the sick man's wife told Father Gilligan that after he had left, her husband died as a happy man. Hearing this, Father Gilligan knelt on the ground. The dead man's spouse further told him that after he had gone away, her husband turned and died as merry as a bird. On hearing these words, old priest Peter Gilligan understood that God had sent one of his angels to perform Father Gilligan's duty. He who hath made the night of stars for souls who tire and bleed, sent one of his great angels down to help me in my need. In this stanza, we hear Father Gilligan speaking. He says that God had created the starry sky to comfort the souls of the sick and the dying. And that same God must have sent one of his angels to take Father Gilligan's place at the bedside of the dying man. On hearing these words, old priest Peter Gilligan understood that the God had sent one of his angels to perform Father Gilligan's duty and prayed to God. He addressed God as one who has made the starry night. God, the omniscient, had sent one of his angels to help him who was tired and bleeding from within. Father Gilligan was grateful or thankful to God for being kind and merciful to him. He who is wrapped in purple robes, with planets in his care, had pity on the least of things, asleep upon a chair. In this stanza, Father Gilligan continues to speak. He says that God is a king in purple robes. Purple robes means a long, loose piece of clothing worn as a sign of rank or office, as fathers in churches are wearing. But in white color, here it is in purple color, that robe. And all the planets are in his dominion, in his hands. However, he is so merciful that he even had pity on such a meager creature. Here, meager creature, he is telling that Father Gilligan, as Father Gilligan, while he was asleep upon his chair. How do you understand about the character of Father Gilligan from the words had pity on the least of things? It shows that Father Gilligan was very humble. He considers himself the least of things, an unimportant being.
But God had pity on him and sent his angel to do his duties. Okay, that's all for today, children. We can discuss the question answers, textual question answers, structure, style, and figure of speech through Google Meet. Okay. Thank you. Have a nice day.